So, Vanessa, welcome to Rights for Women. It's great to have you back. And for those who might be listening out there, this is our second chat in a month or so because Vanessa's recording that I did with her was the only recording that I actually lost when my computer decided to crash. So, we're back for round two and doing it all again. So, thanks for that, Vanessa.
Thank you for having me again. Hopefully you won't fall asleep with the same answers.
I'm positive I won't. So let's get started. The Valley of Lost Stories is a beautiful novel about four women. It's a group of school mums who venture off to a hidden valley on a getaway, but things do go wrong quite quickly for them. Could you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so these four women and their children are invited to a remote valley, the Kapiti Valley, which is about 3 hours west of Sydney. And they kind of don't know what to expect, but they get there. There's nothing really there except for this beautiful restored Art Deco hotel and the crumbling remains of this old mining town, which is now essentially a ghost town. So straight away, these unlikely friends, because they don't know each other that well, are sort of in this really atmospheric setting. And they discover that this is sort of a place that's filled with secrets. So in 1948, a woman named Clara Black walked into the night, never to be seen again, and it's this enduring mystery that happened in the valley. And then it's sort of slowly revealed that these four women have got secrets of their own. So Natalie is sort of struggling in a failing marriage, and Emmy's yearning for another child. Pen is struggling as a single parent, and Alexandra is hiding in the shadow of this famous husband. And yet on the surface, they all seem very together, but all this stuff is sort of happening under the surface. And then as the sort of mystery of what happened to Clara Black 70 years ago unravels, one of these women also goes missing in the valley, and sort of these devastating truths begin to emerge. So it's essentially a story about motherhood, about women's friendships, about the secrets we kind of keep from each other and ourselves. And it's, I would say, sort of an atmospheric mystery.
Mm. That's a fabulous description of it, Vanessa, and all those reasons that you summarised at the end was, I think, why I love the book so much. It's just the sort of story that I love, with all that richness about women's lives, and beautifully written too. And you've got multiple viewpoints, you've got a dual timeline. And I'm just wondering, was that your intention from the beginning, to have all those different elements happening in the storyline? How did those parts of the story actually evolve for you?
I'm a bit of a pantser, so I didn't sit down with a structure by any means. It was more a case of these four separate women's voices coming one, and then realizing, okay, this is each character's sort of motivation, this is each character's flaw, this is sort of each character's journey, and then finding a way that I could sort of puzzle them all together in book, exploring similar themes. So I really started with the women, and I can't even remember which woman came to me first. I think it might have been Emmy. And then I kind of realized, oh, okay, this is another voice, and that's Natalie. And I kind of write in a bit of an organic way, where I think the actual writing is the thing that makes the story come to me, rather than me thinking it all in my head and plotting it and then starting to write. So when I think back on how it emerged, it's quite difficult to articulate exactly how it all happened. It's sort of, I mean, I'm not sure how you write, Pam, but it's almost a bit of a mystery when you think back. You think, how did these characters come to me? Where did they come from? But I think, yeah, I do remember that there wasn't a dual timeline initially. There wasn't the 1948 storyline. It was just the four women. And then I think I had them sort of sorted out, and then I decided to take them to this valley. And when I actually went to visit the valley myself, my mum and my daughter, and saw that it's really a ghost town and how atmospheric it was, and I thought, oh wow, I actually have to write a historic element to this. I have to do a 1948 or sometime in the 1940s, because that's when the actual mining town was at its peak in the 40s. And then I went back and went, okay, how am I going to puzzle in this historic timeline with these four women? And I must admit, I think I lost about 25,000 words at that point, where I went, okay, no, I've got to reconfigure everything. So that was hard, but I knew that it was a sacrifice that I had to make at that point, and I'm so glad I did. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that evolved. And then I think I was writing the timeline, the past timeline and the contemporary timeline concurrently for a while. And then at one point, I had to just kind of, oh, I need to do the 1948 timeline and see how that ends. And then I sort of slipped it all back into the contemporary timeline. Yeah. I think that's what happened.
Juggling, yeah.
It's hard to remember.
Yeah, and of course it would be, even though the book hasn't been out for that long, it's a while since you went through that actual process. So totally understandable that it's all a little bit fuzzy. And as you say, there is that whole mysterious element to how these things come about. I'm actually quite similar to you in that I do pants to a certain extent. I mean, I have a bit of a plot idea, but then I get my ideas from the writing as well. I'm not someone that has a lot of ideas roaming around up in my head. So like you, the ideas come to me as I write. And I need to keep reminding myself.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
I'll often think, oh, you haven't got any ideas, you know, you're not really a writer, what's wrong with you? And then as soon as I start writing, the ideas start to flow. So there must be some hand-brain connection or something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? But I have heard authors talk that can plot out whole books in their head. And that definitely is a thing too. And I'm quite envious of that. But I can get ideas, but I can't formulate entire plots sort of separate to the writing out process.
Yeah, same here. So Vanessa, you mentioned about finding this Kapiti, is it, or Kapiti?
Kapiti, I think. Yeah.
Kapiti Valley, when you were doing some research. Is that when you stumbled across this story about a woman going missing, and that's what enticed you to go and investigate the area itself?
No, that's actually fiction. So I made that bit up. There wasn't a woman that went missing in actual real life, but the ghost town aspect is true. So when you go into this valley, it's a long way from anywhere. It feels like a long way from anywhere anyway. And you literally drive down this sort of unpaved street, and there's just these crumbling houses with only the smokestacks sort of left over. There's a pharmacy with medicines that still date back to the 1950s in the window, just crumbling and rotting. It's just, and of course nature has just taken over. It's just roots going through all the crumbling buildings and grass growing up, and it's just abandoned. And there's this whole area that I think they actually do tours on a weekend of the mine. I didn't get to go through the mine, but it's an entire crumbling mine that is there with like all this sort of old rotting industry and metals and yeah, as soon as I went there, I was just like, wow, I didn't know about this place. And so I'd researched it online because I was trying to find somewhere that would be really great to write a sort of atmospheric mystery. And what you want is somewhere with no reception, because it's so hard, as you would know, to write a plot with mobile phones these days.
Yeah.
And my first book, The Lost Summers of Driftwood, was set in a place with no reception as well. And something that readers had responded to was the really strong sense of place and the natural thing. So I was wanting to replicate that real atmosphere. And so I'd found this place online where there was this, you know, deserted ghost town, and I'm like, that sounds good. And so then I convinced Mum and my daughter to go out there with me, and they were just like, where are we going? Why are you taking us into the middle of nowhere? It was, and I think The Summers of Driftwood hadn't even come out yet. And so they're just like, yeah, you and your pie in the sky writing dreams. So I think they were quite surprised in the end that it turned into a published novel.
That's fantastic. I love that story. Well, just getting back to the characters. So you do have the four main characters, Emmy, Natalie, Penn, and Alexandra. They are all quite different. So, you know, you are someone that learns about the characters and learns the story as you write. Were any of those characters sort of easier to develop for you? How did that process happen in developing those four characters and their storylines?
I think probably the easiest one to write was maybe Alexandra, who is probably the most different to me. She's got kind of a bit of a acerbic wit, and she's quite blunt, and she's probably the most unlikable character of all four women. But I just found her voice came through so distinctly. I don't know if you ever get that with characters, Pam, but you're just like, this is so much fun to write this character, and she's just there at the tip of my fingertips when I sit down.
That's great.
And yeah, it's weird because it's not always the most likable character that is the easiest to write. In fact, I think it's harder to write the likable characters. And that will be sometimes feedback from my editor who are like, can we make this character a bit more likable? Because I tend to really enjoy writing people's flaws and being really truthful about their struggles. And sometimes I think, I struggle to write a really likable character. But having said that, I think there are two really likable ones, Natalie and Emmy. Also, I've been told. So people that have read it have said that they relate to both of those women the most. And it's interesting. I don't always know until the book has had feedback who people will resonate with the most, because I empathize. I'm such an empathetic person. I empathize with all of them. I'm like, how can you not love all of them? But yeah, interesting to see.
Oh, we had a bit of a freeze there. I don't know what happened. I think you're back now. Dropped out for a minute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can now, but I might just get you to repeat that last bit if you can remember what it was.
Yeah. No, I was just saying, do you ever have that surprise of which of your characters resonates the most, or do you always know who's the most likable?
I think it's hard as the author, because you do, I guess you know more about them even in your head than what's on the page that comes out for readers. But I think it is that thing, like you say, that different aspects of characters, you know, resonate with readers differently. So yeah, I've had feedback. I have had feedback on, actually I remember my very first character, main character Eve, who is pretty, not totally rough, but she's a bit rough around the edges. She smokes and drinks and swears, and she doesn't pull any punches, you know. And I do remember having an email sent to me from a reader saying she really enjoyed the book, but did I really have to write characters that drink and swear? And it was weird because it's like, well, I'm sorry if that offended you, but that's who she is, and there are people like that in real life. So
Absolutely, I know, and that's really hard, isn't it?
yeah.
Because yeah, you just like, no, that's who this character is. I can't just change her.
Yeah. I've written one novel that had multiple viewpoints, The Crossroads. I've written a couple actually, but The Crossroads had three women, and alternated around their stories. And I always thought that they were all the main character. And then I went to a Kate Forsyth writing workshop, and she said, no, there's always one main character. Even if you think that they're all main characters, there's always one whose story it really is. And when I thought about it, I realised who the character was in that book. It was Rose. Even though it's not, it wasn't what I sort of intended, but that's who the story was. What about for you with these characters? Is there one character that you feel it's really her story primarily?
Yeah, so I'm a bit like you. I would have said, no, it's all four of their stories. They're all the main character. But then, yeah, when I really reflect on it, it would probably be Natalie, because we open with her run away from her life, and her struggle kind of pulls all the themes and the plot through, and we're waiting to see, is she going to be strong enough to to do what she needs to do. And she's almost the archetypal mother, as in the mother that sometimes we feel we're meant to be. She's beautiful, she's got an amazing husband, a gorgeous husband, successful, amazing house, three beautiful children, and yet we just scratch the surface and she's not coping at all, and everything below the surface is dark and messy. And I guess I just really wanted to explore that dichotomy and that expectation that women sometimes hold themselves up to, that they somehow expect they need to be this certain way, and none of us are. Like, life is dark and messy and difficult, and I really wanted to explore what all these women and mothers were going through really beneath the veneer that they presented to the world, because I think we all do that, and it's not our fault, and we can't help it. It's sort of expected, and you've got to hold it together. You've got to get through life, and you've got to get your kids to school, and you just got to keep going. But at the same time, I think, I talk to my really dear friends, we're talking about what's happening under the surface, and we're talking about what's really going on in our lives. And that's what I wanted these women to be able to do, because I think by connecting on that really real level, that's where we're able to cope and connect and feel heard and be able to just get through the difficult parts of being a woman and being a mother.
Yeah, absolutely true. And did you find, Vanessa, that in having the four different viewpoints to tell the story, that enabled you to go deeper into those particular issues? All the women are experiencing slightly different versions of life and motherhood, quite different in some instances. And I guess having the each parts of those stories told from their individual viewpoints, it does allow you to have that depth, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And just being able to show how, the women view each other, where they will perhaps look at someone like Natalie, who is so beautiful and seems to be so together, and we're in someone's head who's admiring her, and then we go into her head and she's a complete mess. So it allows you to see the surface and then what's really happening. And so I think I sort of do that a little bit in going into each woman's head to see what's actually going on in her mind. And it's a really great way to progress the story and to increase tension, because I think I was always thinking, okay, so should I go in now that is going to be most sort of under pressure in this next part of the story?
Yeah.
And then I'd go into their head because I know that would be coping the least, sort of thing. So it's such a great way to amp up tension in your writing and to just obviously like change things up for yourself so you don't get bored, and for your readers.
Yeah, true. And did you have any difficulty at any point, Vanessa, differentiating between the voices of the four women? And was that something that in the revision process that you were really conscious of?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that the women all had pretty distinctive voices. So that was one of the first bits of feedback I got from my editor. She said that that's actually what's so important. If you're going to have that many multiple viewpoints, that having really distinct characters, voices, and sort of motivations is just imperative for the reader to not get confused. And I didn't actually have to do a lot of work on that. So I think somehow I was able to delineate the different women quite distinctly. And I'm not actually entirely sure how I did that. It was really easy with, as I said, Alexandra, who was more sort of wry and like sort of dark in her tone. And perhaps Natalie and Emmy are sort of a little bit more similar. So that was maybe something I had to work on a little bit with the two of them. And then Pen sort of seemed quite different to all three of them. So yeah, it wasn't something I had to pay particular attention to, but I think that was the only reason that the story worked, because otherwise you'd just get too confused as to who was who. So I'd say that that's such an important tip for when you're writing multiple points of view, that you just get those different character voices or whatever it is, like just that, even the language that they use or the dialogue, that it has to be quite distinct one from the other.
Yeah. And they are, which, as you say, it works so well because they are all quite different to each other. And what about in the historical timeline, Vanessa? We have Clara Black, who appears briefly, and the other character there is, of course, is Jean. How did you go about developing her storyline? Was it along the same lines where you just sort of let your imagination go and thought about what it would be like to be living in that valley back in the 1940s?
Yeah, so I did some research after I'd been into the valley and seen, the crumbling remains and felt the atmosphere there. I then went and found a really great resource by a woman called Leonie Knapman, who had grown up in the valley as a child and written this kind of exhaustive account of, it's called Glen Davis, a shale oil ghost town, and it's almost like an encyclopedia of everything to do with the history of the valley. There's very little written online, so I had to search for this in like antique bookshops. Finally, I found it, and I just I really researched into what it was like for a woman living in this remote valley in the 1940s, where it was freezing in winter, boiling in summer. There was no real fresh water. There were bushfires, there were floods. When they first came to the valley, they were living in sort of tents and things. I mean, it was so difficult. They had children there, and the men were all off working in the mines, and the women were just trying to make do in the middle of nowhere. And you just kind of think back to that and you think, gosh, women, Australian women are tough, like what they actually would have lived through during that time. And so I think just, having that helped me to come up with the character of Jean. But having said that, I'm not sure exactly where she came from. I just, again, started writing, and there was this woman who was yearning for another life outside the valley, and she was feeling really trapped. And I think what I start with characters is a feeling, like they're in some kind of turmoil and there's just this overwhelming feeling, and then I follow that feeling and the character sort of comes from that. I don't know, is that what you work with as well? Like sometimes it's just this, like a really vague feeling, and you go with that and it sort of leads you somewhere.
Yeah, I think I do too, actually, because one thing that I've discussed a little bit on the podcast before is I think I've got a thing, I think it's called anesthesia, where you, something like that, where you actually don't see pictures in your head. So I don't actually get like a visual movie running through my head like a lot of people do, which is actually kind of annoying. I wish I did. But I still somehow see it. I don't know whether it's the sixth sense or the intuition or something. And I think I do go on feeling rather than that visual thing. You know, I'm still able to describe things, I think. But I don't actually get the movie. So feelings and emotions are really important for me as well.
That's so fascinating. That's just really amazing. When did you realize that you had that?
Well, actually, I sort of thought for a while, you know, people say, oh, it's just like a movie running in my head. And I'll think, oh, yeah, I don't really have that. You know, I'll say, oh, yeah, I know what you mean. But inside I felt, oh, what's wrong with me? You know, I don't have movies in my head. So I've always kept it pretty quiet. And then actually, Kelly Rimmer was talking about it online one day. And we were chatting about it. And I said, you know what? I've got that. And she actually sent me an article, and she was asking me about it because she was quite fascinated by it too. She said, but how do you actually write scenes if you don't see them in your head? And I said, well, I don't visually see them, but I sort of see them in other ways. I don't know. It's very weird and a bit frustrating, I have to say. But anyway, what do you do?
That's amazing. And when you're reading a book, you're not seeing it in your mind's eye.
Not really. I feel it. I think I feel it. Yeah. And yet when I dream, I see things really vividly in dreams, but then later I can't actually recapture those images in my head. So.
Wow. That is so amazing. That's pretty fascinating. I feel like there could be a book idea in that.
Yeah, I think I might have to do a whole episode on it or something. But anyway, back to your fabulous book. So you've got the four women's stories, and you've got the other story happening with Jean and Clara in the valley. It happened in 1948 or in the 1940s. Once you've done your draft of that and you know that you've got these two different timelines, was there much work then for you in the revision process in working out how to thread those stories together?
I mean, I think there was a little bit of shifting around, but I think my first draft is fairly exhaustive. So I'm not one of these writers that bang out the entire first draft in 3 months, which I know some authors do, like get the bare bones down. I don't do that. Once my first draft is done, I mean, it's pretty much ready to send to my editor. I've got to go over it again, but it takes me, you know, a year, if not longer. And I've sort of tracked it all very much as I go. And so when I sit down the next day to write, I'll go over what I've done the day before. So I think the whole time I'm writing the first draft, I am piecing it all together. So Yeah, and I just write in Word. I don't use Scrivener, so which I'm tempted to though, because it was difficult because you're scrolling through thousands, like hundreds of words.
Yeah.
To try and work out, oh, hang on, where did I put that bit where she goes and does that? You know, that needs to change to somewhere else, and that's a pain.
Yeah.
But I write chronologically, so I think that makes it a lot easier for myself. So I do see it as a movie in my head, and it's weird. I've got the worst memory on the entire planet. I can't remember anything ever, but I kind of can remember the entire details of a novel.
Great.
It's really weird.
That's all
and
you
so
need,
I'll be
really.
like, okay, well, but I can't remember someone's mobile phone, number. So yeah, I kind of have to rely on that. But yeah, it can be a pain, I tell you.
And so, you mentioned before, Vanessa, about how having the multiple viewpoints and having the dual timeline, it does allow you to build tension and suspense. Is this something that you're very conscious of when you are doing that first draft, that you sort of think, okay, I need to stop this particular bit of the story here and then switch to the character who's got the most at stake in the next scene? Is that how your brain works when you're doing that?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's probably something I probably learned instinctively through being a journalist, where you just know that you have to keep people's attention, and you just have to keep the tension. And so I am a fan of, the cliffhanger line at the end of the chapter. And then you can flash back to, like, the other timeline, and then the reader's like, oh, but I wanted to know more.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that's a great way to keep the tension going. And it's interesting because I consider the way I write to be quite slow paced in some senses, but then people will say, no, it wasn't slow. It kept the tension, but I'm not even really aware that I'm overtly doing it. So I think it must be something that I've, just internalized through years of writing as a journalist.
Yeah.
Which is great, because obviously that's pretty key to getting a book, that people just keep wanting to read. And I think I've been reflecting on it, and I think because I don't go in with a big plot, the only thing I've really got is just that knowledge that I just have to keep pulling the tension tight, because
Right.
otherwise, it's all going to fall to the floor, because I don't really know where I'm going, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do. And I love that image of you, pulling the thread almost and pulling it tighter and tighter as the story continues. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this device really of having multiple viewpoints, and then having, if you want to throw in like an additional timeline as well, it is a really good way of keeping the reader interested. And it's almost like you're holding your breath as over one chapter while you wait to see what happens to that character that you've just read about, isn't it? I always remember reading the book A
Yeah.
Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth many years ago, and it was probably one of the first books that I read, and he jumps between, different members of two different families. And I was very much into that, thinking, oh, but I just want to know what happens to this family. But then you get so engrossed in the next storyline that you'd sort of almost forget about the other character until you came back to them. So I think it is a really great device for developing tension and creating that suspense for the reader.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I hadn't, the Lost Summers of Driftwood, it was all from one point of view. So, I mean, I had a flashback to when they were kids, and that was in one of the other characters' minds, but I really only had the two. So yeah, this was sort of an experiment for me. And I'm not sure whether I'll be able to ever just go back to having one point of view again, because I find it so much easier to, because when when you're writing a novel, you get to the middle and you're like, oh my gosh, where on earth am I going to take this now? Like, and I think if you've got those multiple voices, it's so much easier to go, okay, well, I'll go into her brain for a while. It just gives you so many more options to keep the story going.
Yeah, for sure. And even though you write intuitively, Vanessa, I know that timelines are the bane of many writers' existence, including mine. I'm someone that I'll just write and I'll think, oh, I'll fix that up later. I'll worry about the timeline later. And then, of course, when I actually have to try and fix that up, it's a total headache. Did you have that experience, or is it something that you were really conscious of keeping on top of as you wrote?
Yeah, I think I kept on top of it as I wrote. But having said that, I finished the 1948 timeline, like I probably interspersed it for the first half, and then I just thought, no, I need to just write the rest of the historical timeline separate to the contemporary women, because I was kind of getting a bit frustrated going between them, and I needed to know where the historical timeline was really heading. And so then I just wrote that, and then I fed that through the contemporary storyline. And I think that worked really well because, it was getting a bit unwieldy, like you're saying. Like, I just needed to finish that bit off. And I'm not sure how other people deal with that sort of timeline stuff. I mean, there must be some people that write the entire second timeline separately and then weave it through. But I think I just was really conscious of having a thematic link between the contemporary and the historical timelines, that I wanted it to mean something, that there was this other timeline, and because it plays into the mystery, I got to halfway through and I was like, how is this going to play to the mystery? I don't really know. I think I'd better work this out. So, that was a bit scary for a while there.
Always happens in that annoying middle, doesn't it? It's like, oops.
Absolutely, the middle. Oh.
Well, Vanessa, what tips? I mean, I'm sure we've already, covered lots of things about multiple viewpoints and the dual timeline, but what specific tips would you give to people who are out there thinking they're either writing, multiple viewpoint, writing dual timeline, or thinking maybe they should add another character into their narrative? What sort of advice would you give them?
I think go for it. Like, I don't think you're going to having that choice of where to take the story and whose head you're going to go into. And I think it's a really fun way to write. But I think, as we discussed before, you have to really have your characters as being very distinct personalities from each other. Otherwise, the reader's going to get confused. And with the dual timelines, I just think you've got to really be aware of, that thematic link. Why am I writing this other timeline? How is it going to weave into the contemporary or the other timeline to kind of have a thematic impact? That's something that was always sort of niggling at me, like, it's a completely different time, completely different character, quite a different voice. Jean's voice, and even the writing around it, had a romanticism and a oldie worldy sort of feeling that was quite different to contemporary women. And so I was kind of thinking the whole time, how is this playing together? And, how's it all going to weave together? together. So I think, yeah, you just do have to really be wary of that. But I think adding that dual timeline, I think it just enriches the writing and the book, and it just gives just a depth that you won't get if you're just going to go for the one timeline. So the book that the new book I've just finished now has got 1960s, 1990s, and today. And once again, I really liked having all three timelines to sort of play in, and it allows you to do a bit more research as well. Yeah, I can't imagine writing another book without having that, because I just find that it just deepens the story and the characters. And I do history, and and with Valley, I haven't mentioned the Indigenous history, but there's a little bit of that timeline as well. I did a lot of research into the Wiradjuri people, and some of the atrocious massacres that went on at first settlement. And I wanted to weave in as well, because that again adds another dimension. And yeah, just in terms of the natural history and the feeling of atmosphere and the haunting feeling in the valley. So yeah, I really think that having those multiple timelines, it gives that depth.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And just before we get on to our 4 curly questions, which we're going to talk about soon, one aspect of your writing, it's kind of related to what we've been talking about, to the multiple points of view and everything, but that you are, I think it's something that you are fantastic at, is your description of the setting and creating this atmosphere where, the women actually feel it as soon as they go into the valley. There's this sense of this almost haunted type place that they're in, and your descriptions of the natural world are beautiful. Is that something that you've always loved to do in your writing, and something that you really enjoy as part of that whole experience of writing the novel?
Oh, thanks so much, Pam. Yeah, I think that that's the part of writing that comes more naturally to me. I really struggle with plot and story, but the actual just description and the inspiration I feel about nature, and immersing myself in terms of the smells and the whole feeling. Using writing to express the feeling of a place is something I just love to do. And it's interesting, when I wrote the Lost Summers of Driftwood, my editor was like, can we stop it with the smells? Like, you have so many descriptions of smells in this book. And I'm like, but it smells like fish, and it smells like river salt. And I mean, I did take some of them out, but I also argued to keep some of it. And then when the book came out, people really responded to that. They were like, I felt like I was right there on the river. I could smell it. And I'm like, yep, there you go. They could smell it.
Editor.
So yeah, right. Take that.
Yeah, that sensory writing really
that is the part of writing that I love.
Yeah, it does help bring it to life, I think, for sure. Well, that's the main part of the discussion around dual timelines and multiple points of view, which has been fantastic. And I know there's lots of detail in there for people who are listening and people who are writing anything along those lines. But we're about to launch into our 4 curly questions, which is part of the extended edition for this particular episode, which will go out to some of the Patreon supporters at the community level at Patreon. So if anybody is interested in finding out more about that, they can look it up on rightsforwomen.com, the website, and go to the information about the Patreon support, and that's where you'll find the information. Yeah, So let's launch into the 4 curly questions. And to start with, Vanessa, it's not too curly. It just is, did you suffer with this one from second novel syndrome? Because The Lost Summers of Driftwood was very well received. It was your first book, your debut novel. And I'm just wondering how you felt. You often hear about second novel syndrome. So I'm wondering if you did suffer from it, and if you did, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always nerve-wracking, no matter what number novel you put into the world. I find it a really difficult part of the process, putting the book out there and waiting for how it's going to be received. But I think, yeah, something that was new was when people were sort of comparing me to me, like this book, you know, compared to her other book. And that's a real spin out, you know. But at the same time, I mean, I feel like you can't just keep writing the same book over and over again. Well, I can't anyway. And so while I think there's a thematic similarity between the books, they're both sort of, I would say, atmospheric mysteries with elements of, you know, drama and friendship drama and a little bit of romance. They're very different books. And The Lost Summers of Driftwood was about a woman that sort of felt that she didn't fit society's mold, and she escaped to this you know, this river, and that woman was sort of in her 30s, and I think that resonated with a certain type of reader, and then that reader is going to be quite different to the reader that's resonating with the struggles of motherhood. And so, you know, you can't please everyone, and I think some people prefer Driftwood, some people prefer the Valley, and it really does seem that it's just how it sort of lies. But I've been lucky enough that no one said, oh, this second novel's crap compared to the first, because I mean, that's what you are fearing the whole time, that's what people will say. And I'm sure it does happen, and that must be absolutely heartbreaking, because you can only write what you can write, you know. But yeah, I think I was lucky in this, and you just have to kind of try not to overthink all that stuff. But I actually really feel sorry for people that have that massive debut hit book. Like, I think the expectation after something like that would be so crippling. And I mean, I didn't have that level of success, and so there's not that huge expectation. But I think that would be hard, and there wouldn't be many people that you could complain to, you know. Everyone would be like, suck it up, you've got a hit novel. So yeah,
what are you whinging about? You just sold, you know, 20,000 copies.
Exactly.
Why are you complaining?
Yeah.
Were you contracted? Did you have a contract to write the second book?
No, I didn't. And I think I'm much better writing without expectation. I think if I've got freedom, I'm going to go better than if I'm sort of locked into something. So then when I wrote Valley, I got a 2-book deal. So the Valley's come out, and now my next book is contracted, and that's currently with my publisher, and that's hopefully going to come out end of this year or early next year. And so I was writing to a contract then, but I was just really mindful of not being, I don't know, just trying not to think about that aspect of it, and just write what you're going to write, and let all that other stuff go, because I think that can be really crippling to writers, to write to expectations and contracts, and I think you got to find a way to rise beyond that.
Yeah, good advice. So the second curly question, Vanessa, is what's your biggest writing or writing related disaster, if you have any?
So I've had some in as a journalist, I remember when I was a journalist for the Daily Telegraph, I had a big story, and we used to work in this really antiquated system where you couldn't really save as you were writing. And I just lost the entire story before deadline. And in those days, you'd spend the entire day like out and about interviewing people, and then you'd write the whole thing up, you know, in the last couple of hours. And then at 5 o'clock, that was the deadline. And I just remember the horror when the screen went blank, and I just knew it was gone, and I just had to write the entire thing again in like 5 minutes. And it's so hard. It's ironic we're talking about this after we lost this podcast.
Yeah,
but it's so hard to replicate the same passion as the original, I think. Yeah. So now whenever I write anything, I'm so diligent about doing another copy, backing it up, because it's so hard to have to go back to something. And so I lost part of my honours thesis as well, which was that preceded being the journalist. So I obviously didn't learn from that. But I've never, fingers crossed, touch wood, I've never lost any creative writing.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know what I've lost, to be honest, because I had started for some ridiculous reason with my computer saving things to download because I was a bit nervous. All my documents were in the cloud. Somehow my computer just did that, saved everything to the iCloud. And I was a bit nervous that the cloud wouldn't work. So instead of saving things to documents, I started saving them to downloads. And ironically, it's the documents that I now have back and none of the downloads. So who knows what, I'm going to just one day be looking for something and go, oh, no, I don't have that anymore. But anyway, yes, lesson learnt, hopefully.
Oh, lesson learned. Yeah. Oh, wow, it happens to us all.
It does. We've all got to go through it. Question number 3, Vanessa, is if you could travel back in time to when you first started writing, what advice would you give your beginner writing self?
I think I would say you need to write from the inside out rather than the outside in. And my writing self probably wouldn't know what that meant, but what I'm meaning is you have to kind of write what you feel, what you believe, what you're passionate about. I mean, that seems really obvious, but I think being a journalist, my job was always to see the trends, to see the zeitgeist, and to somehow respond to that. And I think I've made the mistake in the past to applying that to writing novels. And it's just not the same as journalism. Journalism happens straight away. Novels take years to germinate, to, you know, get out there. And the thing that is trending at the moment, it's gone by the time you've written your novel and it's out there. And you also get editors suggesting things that you should or could write. And sometimes you want to please them. I'm a people pleaser, so that's potentially something when I was younger that I was more inclined to do. And I think now I just know that it has to be something so personal. It has to be you in a room, not thinking about anyone looking over your shoulder, not thinking about who's going to read it, what you're going to be embarrassed by, just letting it come out. And also finding something that, it's hard to articulate, but I think I have to find something, an issue that is so important to my characters that beyond what I've written, I want that issue to have light shone on it. It's like this, you know, the essence of the emotion of the book, that there's something that moves you as a writer in this book that you hope you're passing on to the reader to be moved by as well. And it has to be something from your sort of most vulnerable emotional place, I think. And that's sort of what I mean by writing from the inside out. And so it's just a real giving of yourself and all your emotion. And also just, I would say to myself as well, you are always going to struggle with publicity and putting yourself out there. And that is just going to be a really stressful part of the process for you. But you just get through it, and then you can go back into your room and you can just go back into your book again and you'll be happy.
Yeah. Just push through the hard bits.
Yeah.
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 Wonderful advice to yourself and to other writers out there. And then lastly, Vanessa, what do you feel that you've become quite proficient at in your writing, and what thing or things would you like to maybe work on improving in your writing?
I think, as I mentioned before, I would really love to improve my storytelling and my plotting. I remember I went on a book tour with Adele Parks, who's the amazing UK writer. I think that was at the beginning of 2020, and she was telling me that she has 4 decent book ideas every day. And I'm like, what? Can I please have one? She just has so many incredible, like, whole premises come to her. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And all the other authors, there were three other authors, 2 other authors, they all just looked at her as went, oh, well, I don't have that. So obviously that's her particular gift. But yeah, I just feel like stories are, you know, she's written a novel a year for 20 years. So obviously she knows what she's doing. She's got plotting down pat. And I mean, I'm on my 3rd book that I just finished. You know, I've got a long way to go. But I think hopefully the more you do it, the more you sort of work out how to plot and how to, you know, make it all hang together. I'd love to one day plot out a book and know where it's going before I start, but I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And I think the easy part for me is the description of like place and nature, and, you know, the lovely descriptive passages. That's the fun, easy bit. So at least I've got that right.
Yeah, you definitely have. And even though plotting comes hard to you, you did a brilliant job in this book. So well done on that.
Oh, thank you. That's really sweet of you.
Well, that's all for our pearly questions. But I just have to also say, I think the covers of your books, Vanessa, are lovely, and you must be absolutely just blown away by them. How did it feel when you saw your covers for the first time?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, they're just in the background here. Yeah, I feel so lucky because you don't really know what you're going to get until you just get sent a PDF in your email. And usually your publisher's saying, we all love this. We hope you do too. And you're like, I hope I do too. But I did love them. I do love them. And yeah, it's just a real pleasure to see someone else's artistic interpretation of your story. It's a really exciting moment to see that. And I could tell with both books that the incredible artist had actually read both books, because she's taken elements that could only be known through the actual reading. So that felt really lovely, because I don't know that the book always gets read when the cover art gets done.
Yeah, no, I don't think it does. But yeah, the cover artist has done a fabulous job with those, and it'll be great to see the new ones. So you finished your book, the next one that you're working on, that's gone off to your publisher now. So you'll be heading into revision stage fairly soon, I imagine.
Yes, yes. Structural edit. Ah, fun and games. But oh look, I usually like cry for about an hour, and then I go, okay, I can do this.
Well, at least you know your process.
I've done it before, right? It's got to be
right.
somewhere.
That's right. Well, look, all the best with the next one. I can't wait to read it, and I can't wait to see it because I'm sure it'll have another beautiful cover. And thank you so much for taking the time again to be on this craft of writing episode.
Thank you so much, Pam. It was actually really fun the second time.
It was. I think we were more relaxed.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
And this is going to be going out next Friday. So also just a little plug for you, Vanessa. You're going to be in 2 weeks' time. So what's the date for the Mudgee Writers Festival that you're going to be appearing at?
The 28th of March, Sunday the 28th of March. And Mudgee is the area of the Kapiti Valley. So it's really lovely that whole area has embraced the book so much. It's really nice.
Oh, that's great. Well, enjoy that. That'll be a fabulous event. And it's a great festival. I was in Mudgee a couple of years ago and I loved it. It was a really good festival. Might even see if I'm free that weekend and come up.
Oh, that'd be great. Where are you based again?
I'm in the Illawarra, so just north of Wollongong.
Ah, yeah, lovely. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm going with my friend, picking her up at Bulli, if you want to jump in the car.
Okay, I'll check the calendar. All right, well, all the best with it, Vanessa, and have a great weekend, and all the best with the revision.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you so much for doing it again. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you.